Let's look at DAF Dalet Amud Aleph, everyone, in Chagiga. We're up to Tumtum and Androgynous. These are two people that the Mishnah had told us are pater from the mitzvah of Re'iyah. So, a Tumtum, we explained, is a person with ambiguous genitalia. You can't tell what they are because there's a membrane or some kind of obstruction that covers the genitalia. And Androgynous is a hermaphrodite. They have dual genitalia, both male and female. Both of these people are pater from Re'iyah. So Tana Rabbana. So the Gemara now tells us that in the Brisa what the source of this halacha is. It says Zachur. So the pasuk really doesn't say Zachur. It says Shalosh Pamim Bashana Yera'eh Kol Zechurecha. That 3 times a year all of your males. The Torah could have said Zachur, all males. Why does it say your males? So the word Zachur tells me Lahotzias Anoshim. That excludes women. And Zechurecha, your males, which is an additional exclusionary letter, Lahotzi Tumtum Vandroginus. That's to exclude these two people. Kol Zechurecha Larabus Es HaKetanim. And finally, the word Kol, all of your males, the word Kol is an inclusionary clause, and therefore is coming to include that even children are obligated, male children. That's the end of the Brisa. The Brisa is a little bit cryptic. We have to now unpack it. Amar Mar. Zachur lahotzi es hanoshim. Halama likra. So the Gemara says, let's look at the first part. It says that you need the word zachur to exclude women from this mitzvah. Why? Why do you need a pasuk? Mechti mitzvah sasei she'azman grama hu v'chol mitzvah sasei she'azman grama nashim peturos. Why is this any different from any other standard positive commandment that's time-bound? Right? Nowhere else does the Torah say explicitly that women are exempt. It's a general rule. So why do you have to say it over here? I'll tell you why. The Gemara says, because yesterday we just saw that Scripture connects the mitzvah of hakel, where it says explicitly that men, women, and children are included in the mitzvah. So you might have thought that even though it's a time-bound mitzvah, that we connect it to hakel, and therefore women should be obligated here. So you need a pasuk to exclude women. Amar Mar. Now let's go to the next part. Zuchurecha lahotzi tumtum vandroginus. That the Zechurecha, that letter Chaf at the end of the word, comes to exclude these two kinds of people. So Bishlama Androginus, Itzterich Salkadaita Chamina, Hol Visleit Sad Zachrus Lichayev Kamash Malan Debriya Bifnei Atzmahu. So I can understand why the Torah needs to exclude the androgynous. This is a man who, or human being, who has dual genitalia. And so therefore, I might have thought that since that he also has male genitalia, then there's this aspect of maleness to this person, and therefore he's included within the male category, and therefore he should be obligated in this mitzvah. So the Torah needs to tell me, no, Zechurecha, he's not considered male. He's considered to be a completely different gender, neither male nor female, and therefore he's pater from this mitzvah. That's why you need a pasuk. But elatumtum sveikahu. But the Gemara says, but I don't understand, why do you need a pasuk to exclude the tumtum? A tumtum is a person that you don't know whether they're male or female, because we can't tell what their genital features are. Now, if that's the case, then it's a suffix whether they're chayav or not to bring a korban on Yontif. And like Tosfos speaks out, anytime a person has a suffix whether they have to bring a korban or not, we say sheiv al taisa. We say don't bring a korban. Why? Because we're worried about bringing chulin into the azar. We're worried about bringing a non-sacrificial animal into the temple. So therefore, obviously, this person would be pater from the mitzvah of re'iyah, right? So then, why do you need a pasuk to exclude a tumtum? Amar Abaye kishavetzav mi bachutz. We're talking about a special kind of tumtum. Now, tumtum is a kind of person that's like one in a few thousand, right? This is a special kind of tumtum, where his testes are visible externally, and only his phallus is, or what we think may be a phallus, is covered, and therefore, in this situation, right, we have determined that there's certainly male characteristics to this person. But because he doesn't have features of a phallus, therefore we exclude him from this mitzvah. That's what the Torah is coming to teach. Let's go on. Now we go on to the next category. Amar Mar Kol Zuchurcha L'Rabbos is Haktanim. It says now Kol Zuchurcha. The word Kol is telling me that all males, including children. Frek the Gemara v'hatnan chutz mecheres shaita v'katan. Wait a minute, our Mishnah said explicitly not that way, that children are excluded from the mitzvah. So Amar Abaya lo kasha kan b'katan shegiya lechinuch, kan b'katan shlo higiya lechinuch. The answer is there's two different ages of minors. Remember, our Mishnah had said, at what age do you have to bring your child? Once he reaches the age, there's a machlokas beishamai beisilel. Does he have to be able to be carried on the shoulders? Can you hold him in his hands? So Abai is saying, so the same thing over here. It's some children you have to bring, and some children are completely exempt. So that's what the Bryce is telling me, that once the child each reaches the age where he can be educated to walk with you to the Beis HaMikdash, then you have to bring him. So wait a minute, but katan shegiya lechinuch derabanani. But wait a minute, that's only midrabanan. We've established already that ketanim are pater from all mitzvahs in the Torah. So how can you tell me that there's a phrase in the Torah that tells me that a katan is chayiv? So the Gemara answers, in achinami ukra asmachta ba'alma. You're right, says the Gemara. This part of the Brisa is indicating a rabbinic law, not a biblical law, and we're only using the phrase kol as an asmachta, as a mnemonic reminder of the rabbinic law. But that's really not what the word kol was the intention when it was written in the Torah. That was not the intention to include children, because that's only a rabbinic law. Now I want to just observe that the Gemara here is doing something very tricky. It's telling me that the first part of the Brisa, which extracts halacha from the pasuk, is the oraisa, and only this part of the Brisa, this last part of the Brisa, which extracts the law of ketanim, is an asmachta. A little bit tricky, I have to confess, it sounds a little bit strange. But the ela kra lamai asa, so then the question is, so then what taka is the real meaning of the word kol? What is it coming to teach? Lichide acherim, it's telling me the opinion of the acherim, a group of sages. The Tanya acherim omrim, hamakametz v'hamitzarif nechoshes v'habursi paturim min ha're'iyah. Now there are certain occupations that make you smell. They make you smell bad, right? What are they? So these are examples. A person who's a dung shoveler. I can't imagine a worse occupation. I mean, what did this guy do to deserve this kind of job? I don't know. When they were passing out jobs, I guess he was late for breakfast or something. V'hamitzarif nechoshes, and the coppersmith. The coppersmithing is a very smelly job because of, I guess, the chemicals involved in the smithing, right? And a bursi and a tanner, the same kind of thing. You come home from work, you wash yourself 100 times, you still have it permeates your skin, and you're still stinky. So these are people who are exempt from the mitzvah of re'iyah. Now, why is that? Mishum shenemar kol zechurecha. Misha yachol lalos in kol zechurecha yatsu elush and ru'in lalos in kol zechurecha. The Torah says all of your males have to be able to join together to make the pilgrimage. This is the last guy you want to sit next to in shul, right? It's worse than the guy with the herring breath. It's really, really stinky. So because he cannot join together with the rest of his brethren in order to make aliyah l'regel, he's therefore pater, and that's what the word kol is coming to teach.
Why didn't the Gemara say what we said yesterday about it's harlem
that was the mitzvah of hakel. So you're asking a question, why not say that if the Torah obligates us to bring our children there, maybe the Torah would obligate us to bring our children here as well? Very interesting question. In other words, why not say, we know that ketanim are pater from all mitzvahs, and yet we see that the Torah tells us to bring our children. We have to conclude that the only time that we can obligate children in anything is if the Torah says so explicitly. Otherwise, we have the general rule that ketanim are always pater. So unless the Torah says so explicitly, we can't be marba them based on an extra word. That's what I would tell you. Okay.
Say that the reason they bring them so those who bring them get the schar.
That's right. It's clearly not the child who's chayiv. It's the parents who have an obligation of bringing their children. It does something to enhance the mitzvah for the gedolim. Okay.
They have a lot of babysitters now. This whole category of people can be babysitters at home. So I did that you brought the children to the hakels to give them schus because there's no babysitters now. They just define the whole group of people who can be babysitters.
Smell.
I just want to connect all the dots. The kids are all working.
They're traumatized for life. Okay. All right. So nashim va'avadim she'enon mishuchrarim v'chulei. Okay, let's go on to the next part of the Mishnah. We have women and slaves that have not been freed. These are people who are pater from re'iyas also. That's what the Mishnah had told us. So the Gemara now says, Bishlam and Nashim Kida Amra. Okay, I can understand women are pater from re'iyah because we know, Kol Zuchuracha, it says only your males, right? So Ela Avad Minalin, but how do you know that slaves are pater from the mitzvah of re'iyah? So Amar Avuna Amar Kra, El Pinei Ha'adon Hashem. Because the Torah says, remember, that you have to be visible to the face of the Master Hashem on the Shalosh Regalim. Now it says the Master. So Misha Einlo Ela Adon Echad Yasaseh Sheyish Lo Adon Acher. So since it says the Master, it means that the only Master you have is Hashem, and that's who the pasuk is talking about as the mitzvah of Aliyah L'Regel. But if you have another master, because you're a slave, so then that tells you that you're pater. So the Gemara now says, okay, wait a minute. I can understand that that's somewhere in a brisa, but halama likra. Why do you need a pasuk to tell me? Why does it have to say ha'adon? Mechti kol mitzvah she'ha'isha chayeves ba eved chayev ba kol mitzvah she'ena isha chayeves ba ena eved chayev ba degamar la la me'isha. We know that there's a gzeira shava having to do with slaves and women and females. It says one place, V'chasav la sefer krisus, that when a man divorces his wife, he shall write her a writ of divorce. And it also talks about a shivcha, a woman who is a slave, and it says, chufsha lo nitan la. The word la is also used. And the Gemara says, this is Gzeira Shava to teach me that anytime a woman is obligated in a mitzvah, a slave is also. And anytime a woman is exempt from a mitzvah, a slave is also exempt. So why do you need the special word ha'adon to exclude a slave from the mitzvah of re'iyah? It should automatically be known that once a woman is excluded, a slave is automatically excluded. So Amar Ravina lo nitzracha elo lamisha chetzio eved v'chetzio ben chorin. So Ravina says, and this is the same Ravina that we saw previously. Ravina says that the purpose of this pasuk, which tells me that an eved is excluded, is not referring to a full-blown eved, but a half and half eved. A half and half eved is going to be excluded from the mitzvah, even though there's an aspect of him that is partially a free man. And we had gone through this whole discussion a couple days ago when we first the first DAF of Maseches Chagiga. So the Gemara now says, Dika nami dekatani nashim va'avadim shenon meshuchrarin. And we can infer that actually from the language of the Mishnah itself, because the language of the Mishnah was, who's exempt? Women and slaves who have not been freed. So the question is, that's like totally redundant. Mai shenon meshuchrarin. Ilema shenon meshuchrarin klal lisni avodim stama. He says, what does it mean, slaves who have not been freed? If it was referring to a regular slave, just say slaves. Slaves, by definition, mean people who have not been emancipated. So ella lav she'enon meshucharin legamrei umayninu mishachetzu v'shachetzu ben chorin shmamina. So really, what the Mishnah is referring to is a person who has not been fully emancipated, and that's referring to a half slave, half free man. And therefore, the chiddush of the Mishnah is that even though you're half and half, you're still pater min hariyah. Now this is contra to what we just learned 2 days ago. 2 days ago we said that when the Mishnah says hakol chayavin, what is it coming to include? It's coming to include misha chetzio eved b'chetzio ben chorin, that half and half is still obligated to re'iyah. Why? Because Beis Hillel recanted their original position and said that we forced the master of the half of him that's a slave to free him. And since we force him to free him, that even before he frees him, we view him as if now he's already a full free man. So it turns out, the way that the Gemara is now explaining it, is that the word hakol, which is the first part of the Mishnah, is implying that a half and half person is obligated to re'iyah. And the second part of the Mishnah is referring back historically to the time before Beis Hillel had recanted, and is saying that a half and half is pater from re'iyah. So you have both verbiages that are contained in the Mishnah. The first part implying that he's obligated, and the second saying, but ich gedenkt, I remember that there was a time when Beis Hillel had held that he was pater. But it's a historical inclusion that really is only just for the purposes of reminding us what the original psak of Beis Hillel was, but not halacha l'maisa. It's an interesting point, just to keep it in mind. Which stays the final namaskana, that he's obligated, because the master has to free him. Next, v'hachigur v'hasuma v'choyle v'hazaken. So then we said that a person who's lame, and a person who's blind, a person who's sick, and a person who is elderly, these are all people who are pater from re'iyah. So Tanu Rabbanan, Rigalim, the Torah says, Regalim, which means feet. It also means pilgrimages. So prat lebale kabin. This excludes someone who's an amputee. So he was just found guilty. The Pistorius, is that his name?
Yeah.
Right?
Manslaughter.
Manslaughter. So he gets up to 15 years. He hasn't been sentenced yet. Davar acher.
You made it into the DAF twice.
That's right.
That's
right. In 7 years, they'll look at this DAF Yomi on kosher tube. They'll say, "Who are they talking about?" Davar acher. He'll be still be sitting. Davar acher. Regalim. Another explanation of what regalim means, because remember we had seen yesterday that maybe it's learned from pe'amim, not from regalim, that a person who's an amputee is exempt from aliyah regal. So what is regalim? Prat lechiger v'lachola v'lasuma v'lazake. The word regalim excludes someone who's not able to walk even though he has feet. So that excludes a person with some disability, a person who's sick, a person who's blind, and a person who's elderly. And the last category is u'l'she'enu yachol la'alos beraglav, or a person who's not able to go with his feet. Now, v'she'enu yachol la'alos beraglav lasuyimai. What is that coming to add? We've already included all the categories. Amarava lasuye mefaniki. It's coming to include a person who is fastidious. What does that mean? It means he doesn't want to walk barefoot up to the Temple Mount and into the Temple courtyard. He says, it's gross. It's like when I go to the airport, they tell me, take off your shoes. Like I'm thinking to myself, how many thousands of people with athletes' feet have stood in this exact spot where I'm walking now with just my socks. So it grosses you out, right?
You think about this?
Yeah, I do think about it.
Now we're going to think about that.
Right? If they did a scan of germs in that spot where they tell you take off your shoes, I mean, it's probably...
A double pair of socks.
All right, I don't know. But anyway, the point is that what if a guy starts thinking about these things and it freaks him out and he says, I can't go to the Temple Mount, there's too much athlete's foot here, right? And so the Torah says, if you're so freaked out by this that you don't want to take off your shoes, you're putter from Re'iyah. Hashem says, I don't want you here. If you can't pull yourself together and realize that the spiritual benefits overwhelm any kind of concern about cleanliness in this particular case, then we don't want you here.
I mean, all these cases, they can go if they want. They're not obligated, right?
Well, I think in this situation, well, I'm not so sure. I mean, it sounds like they could go if they want to, they're putter. But this particular person, v'she'enu yachol lalos, he can't bring himself to do it, is like he's so disgusted by it that Hashem says, forget it. Then you shouldn't force yourself. Dichsiv ki savo leiraos panai mi bikesos miyedchem ermos chatzeirai. Like the pasuk in Yeshaya says, but chastising the Jewish people at that generation, he says, when you come to be seen before me, who asked you to trample my courtyard? Trampling implies with shoes on. Hashem says, you don't want to walk barefoot because it's too pasnished for you. It's okay. I'm Moichel. Hashem says, you don't need to come. Tana. Ha'arel ve'hatame peturin min ha're'iyah. So the Brisa now says, an arel, someone who never had a bris, and a person who's tameh, not only can they not come into the Beis HaMikdash, but they're also exempt from sending their carbon re'iyah via a proxy. In other words, obviously they can't come in, but they also don't have to even send it via a shaliach. Bishlam etame dichsivu vasa shama vahavesem shama kol sheishnu levi yeshnu bahava b'chol sheinu b'viya ino bahava. So I can understand why a person who's tameh is exempt from this mitzvah, because the Torah, in talking about bringing the karbanos for Yantiv, uses two verbs, one right after the other in rapid succession. It says, Uvasa shama, you shall come there, and then it says, Vahavesim shama, you shall bring there. So if you can bring a carbon yourself, then you have an obligation to make the pilgrimage. But if you can't bring the carbon because you can't walk inside the temple, so then you're putter from the pilgrimage. So I can understand why a person who's tameh is putter. Ella arel minalan. But where do you see that in arel? Maybe an Arel is allowed to go into the Beis HaMikdash. So why would he be excluded from Re'iyah? Sahamani Rabbi Akiva, the Marbi, the Arel Kitame, or Hai La Arel Kitame. The Tanya, Rabbi Akiva equates the laws of a Arel to a person who's Tame. The Tanya, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Ish l'rabo sesarol. There, the Torah is talking about the laws of Kohanim who are tamei. A Kohen who's tamei may not do the sacrificial avoda. And why does it say the word ish twice, according to Rabbi Akiva? To tell you that there are two types of Kohanim who are disqualified. One is a Kohen who's tamei, and the other one is a Kohen who's an Ariel, who didn't have a bris. Now, why didn't he have a bris? Just give him a bris. The answer is he's a hemophiliac. And his brothers already demonstrated that there's a family disease, and therefore he can't have a bris. So he's not a bad guy. He's an anus rachmana patre. He's exempt from the mitzvah because he simply can't physically have a bris. Tanu Rabbanim. The Brisa now says, Tamei pater min ha're'iyah, dichsivu vasa shama v'havesim shama, kol sheyeshnu b'viyah yeshnu b'hava, v'chol she'enu b'viyah eno b'hava. So the Brisa, just to repeat the Brisa, if a person's tamei, then he's exempt from bringing the olas re'iyah, even via proxy. And he's also pater from any kind of pilgrimage, because the Torah connects his ability to come in personally and bring the korban to the mitzvah of re'iyah. Rabbi Yochanan ben Dahavai Omer Mishum Rabbi Yehuda Suma, and that same brisa tells us something that we had quoted before. Suma be'echas me'inav pater min ha're'iyah, that if a person's blind in one eye, he's also pater from re'iyah. Shenamar yir'eh yera'eh. Kederech sheba liros kach ba leiraos. Ma ba liros b'shtei einav af leiraos b'shtei einav. We just saw this the other day, that the Torah says the word leiraos, to be seen, but if you read it without nikudot, it looks like the word liros. So therefore, just like Hashem comes to see you with full vision, as it were, with two eyes, so too you're only obligated to be seen by Hashem if you have two eyes with which to see. And therefore, if you only have one eye with which to see, then you're pater from the mitzvah of re'iyah. Rav Huna kimati lahaikra yir'eh yera'eh bachi. So when Rav Huna got to that pasuk of that Hashem wants to see you, he cried. He says, Omar evet sherabu mitzapalo lirosa yisrachek mimenu. He cried because then he recalled another pasuk, and which is just the opposite, where Hashem says, I don't want to see you anymore. And he said, how can it be that a servant that was so beloved by his master, to the point where the master says, I can't wait to see you, and yet has had such a downfall, such a tragic fall from grace, as it says, Kisavou le'raos panai mi vikesos miyedchem remos chatziraya. By the time we get to Yeshaya, Hashem says, instead of I can't wait to see you, Hashem says, who asked you to do this? I'm not interested in having you appear before me anymore. So it just shows the great fall that the Jewish people experienced during this period. Rav Huna kimati lahaikra bachin. Rav Huna also reflected on the following pasuk and cried, V'zavachta shalamim ve'achal tasham. Hashem says, I want you to offer sacrifices and eat there together with me at the Beis HaMikdash. Evet sherabu mitzap lechol al shulchanu yisrachek mimenu. How can it be that there was a time when the master couldn't wait to invite us to eat, to dine at his table in the Beis HaMikdash? Dichsiv, and yet now the servant is so distant, there's such a fall from favor from the master. Dichsiv, lama li rov zivchechem yomar Hashem, where Hashem says in the Navi, why do I need all of your karbanos? I'm not interested in having you at my table anymore. Rabbi Lazar kimati lahai krabachi. A similar case is Rabbi Lazar. He says when he got to this pasuk, he reflected upon it and cried. It says v'lo yachlu echav la'anoso soki nivalu mipanav. That when Yosef exposed himself to his brothers finally, it says that the brothers could not respond to him because they were so frightened. He says, if from a human being's rebuke, a person is so frightened that they can't speak, then how much more so will people be unable to speak when HaKadosh Baruch Hu rebukes us? In other words, you look at Yosef, he just said, Ani Yosef ha'od avichai. And the brothers were like, shocked into silence. How much more so when HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings us to task, will we be unable to respond? Rabbi Lazar kimati lahai krabachi. Rabbi Lazar, when he came to the following pasuk, he began to cry. Vayomer Shmuel el Shaul lamahir gaztani laha'alos osi. That there's a famous story about Shaul and the witch of Endor. No, I'll explain. There's a story about after Shmuel had died, Shaul wanted to know whether he should go to war, and he couldn't get a response from any Navi. He couldn't get a response from even the Urim V'Tumim, and he did something illicit because he felt he had no other resort. So he went to a witch, and he said, "Do a séance and bring up the spirit of Shmuel, we'll ask him whether I should go to war or not." And when Shmuel is summoned by the witch, he cries out to Shaul, "Why have you been margiz me?" Now, the word margiz is to anger me, could also mean to frighten me. Lama here gaztani laha'alososi, to bring me up. Uma Shmuel hatzadek hayemisyari min hadin anu alachas kama v'kama. So you see that Shmuel was very frightened from being called to judgment. He thought he was being called to judgment. Now, as we'll see as the story unfolds, Shmuel is in a very nice resting place in Shamayim. That's where a tzaddik goes to Gan Eden, and he's there. All of a sudden, he feels himself being tugged out of Gan Eden to come and be summoned by this witch. He thinks that he's being summoned to a din Torah, to being summoned to judgment in the Pamalya Shal Malak, like in the heavenly court. He doesn't realize what it's for. So therefore, he says to Shaul, "You really gave me a shock." He says,
scared me to death.
So you, right. So that's why Shmuel is very frightened, and so therefore, when we are called to judgment, how much more so? Now, Shmuel, why would he have to be frightened? Shmuel was a tzaddik gomer. Why would he have to be frightened to be called to judgment? He should have had a sense of confidence that whatever they summon me for, I'll be okay. I'll be found innocent. And yet, if he's scared, then surely we should be scared. So Shmuel, so how do we know that Shmuel was worried about being called to judgment? Dichsiv atomer ha'isha el Shaul Elokim ra'isi olim. That she says, the witch says, she says, "I have seen these spirits coming up." Now it says it's written in the plural. Olim trei mashma. It says olim, which means that there was more than one spirit that she saw being summoned. So chad Shmuel v'idach da'azal Shmuel va'asti l'Moshe ba'adei. So what's the explanation? She summoned Shmuel, and Shmuel said, "I'm not going to go myself." So he schlepped Moshe Rabbeinu along with him. Amar lei dilma chas v'sham ledina mitba'ina kum ba'hadoi deleka milsa dekasafta bi'araisa deloki amtia. He said to Moshe, "I need you by my side to be my defense attorney." He says, "Because you know that there's not a mitzvah in your Torah that I didn't fulfill, and therefore come in case they're too harsh in the prosecution, you'll be able to defend me." So you see that if even Shmuel is concerned, so how much more do we have to be concerned when we're called to judgment? Rabbi Ami kimati lahaikra bachi. When the Rabbi Ami came to the following pasuk, he was very upset. He cried, and the reason is because, as we'll see, it's talking about the suffering that the Jews had at the time of the Churban. This pasuk is from Eicha, Yitain ba'afar pihu ulai yesh tikva. Place dirt in his mouth, perhaps there is hope. And he says, Amar kulai hai ve'ulai, question mark. He says, after all of this decimation and destruction and suffering, you would think that atonement had been granted. And yet it only says, perhaps there's hope. Perhaps there's hope after all that suffering. So it's frightening. Rabbi Ami kimati lahaikra bachi. And Rabbi Ami, when he came to this pasuk, he cried. It says in Sefanya, Bakshu es Hashem, and it says, seek out Hashem, and it says, Bakshu tzedek, Bakshu anava, seek out justice, seek out humility, Ulai tisasru b'yom Hashem, and if you do these things, maybe you'll be able to be protected on the day of the anger of God. So Amar Kulei Haiva, you mean to tell me that with all of this justice and righteousness and charity and humility, that only maybe you'll be protected on the day of God's wrath? That's frightening. Rabbi Asi Kimati Lahaikra Bachi. Rabbi Asi, when he came to this pasuk, he cried. It says, and this is a pasuk in Amos, it says, Sinu Ra ve'ehavu tov, despise evil and love goodness. Vehatzigu bashar mishpat, establish justice in the gates. Ulai yechanan Hashem, maybe God will show you favor. So Hashem Elokei Tzavakos. Kulai haiva ulai. He says, you mean it's only a maybe? If after you do all the right things, it's only a maybe that God will provide you with favor. Rav Yosef kimati lahaikra bachi. When Rav Yosef got to this pasuk, he cried, B'yesh nisveh below mishpat. He says the pasuk in Mishlei says that sometimes people die unjustly, meaning that there's no just reason for them to die. It's not really their time. So the Gemara says, Mi'ika da'azl below zimne. Since when can a person die before their time? The Gemara says, yes, it could happen. Ki hoder Rav Bibi bar Abaya havashchiach gabei malach hamavis. The sage Rav Bibi bar Abaya, he used to be visited by the malach hamavis. I don't know. I mean, if I was going to be visited by an angel, I would choose someone else. But for whatever reason, you see, the malach hamavis also works for Hashem, and also is doing God's great work. So that's not surprising why Rav Bibi would have an association with the Malach HaMavis. So one time they were conversing, and he sees the Malach HaMavis in action. So Amar Le Lishluche Zil Aiseli Mira Magdala Seir Nashia. So he hears the Malach HaMavis telling one of his henchmen. So the Malach HaMavis has the whole group of guys that work for him, and he tells one of his henchmen, "Bring me Miriam, the woman's hairdresser." That's what he told him. It's her time to die. Now, Miriam Megadla Seyar is also referenced in Maseches Sanhedrin and Maseches Sota. Some scholars say that it's a reference to Mary Magdalene in the New Testament. But the timeline doesn't work because Rav Bibi lives much later than Yashka. But in any event, I just wanted to, I don't know what it has to do with this story, but anyway, so he hears the Malach HaMavis saying it's time for Mary Magdalene to die, Miriam Megadla Seyar. So Azal Aisile Miriam Megadla Dardiki. So the henchman, obviously, the Malach HaMavis has tough time hiring people, and this guy obviously was not too bright in the brains department, so he ends up bringing him a different Miriam Megadla, Miriam Megadla Dardiki, a Miriam not who takes care of the hair, but a Miriam who takes care of children. She had a child care, and her name was also Miriam, and she also was raising children instead of raising hair and making the hair nice. So he brought the wrong woman. So Amar Lei, Ana Miriam Magdala Seir Nashia Amrilach. So he says to the henchman, he says, I told you to bring me Miriam, the hairdresser, and you brought me the wrong Miriam. Amar Lei Ihachi Ahadra. So the henchman said, okay, boss, no problem, I'll just send her back, and I'll get you the right one. So Amar Lei, Hol Va'isisa Lihavi Leminyana. So the Malach HaMavis says, nah, it's okay. You brought her already. We'll keep her. So we'll keep her as part of the group here. So Elahechi Acholtla. So how are we going to make sure that she dies properly? In other words, how are we going to cause her to die if it's not her time? So the answer is Havas Nakita Misara Biyada. The answer is because she was holding a poker, a flame poker for the fireplace at the time. Vahavas Kashagra Umacharya Tanura, and she was stoking and the coals and sweeping the oven. And Shaklasa Va'anchasa Agaba Dekara Kadcha V'Isra Mazala Va'aisisa. So what happened was this henchman waited for her to do something clumsy. She dropped the poker, and it fell on her foot, and she got burnt from it, and she had a bad mazel as a result, and he figured that was my entree in being able to take her life. Okay, fine. So that's how Miriam Megadla Dardiki dies before her time. So Amalei Rav Bibi bar Abaya Islachu Rishusa Lemiyavid Hachi. Says Rav Bibi turns to the Malach HaMavis. He sees this whole exchange taking place. He says, what right do you have to take her life if it's not her time? She's not the one that's on the list. So Amarlei Velo Ksiv Yesh Nisve Below Mishpat. So Malach HaMavis says, why not? It says in Mishlei that some people die before their time when they're not supposed to. So Amarlei Vahaksiv Dor Holech V'Dor Ba. But what about the pasuk in Koheles, also written by the same Shlomo HaMelech, who says that the generation comes and the generation goes, right? In other words, you can't have the new generation come before the old generation leaves at its allotted time. So how can, if it says Dor Holech V'Dor Ba, it means that everything goes at its proper time. And how can you tell me that she can leave before her time? So Amar Dar'ina Lahu Ana Adamalu Lahu Ladara V'Hadar Mashlimna Le Laduma. He says something very cryptic, which we don't really understand what it means. Malach HaMavis says not to worry. Yeah, I have a certain place where I keep her until her time is up. And no, he's got a nice little garden apartment where he keeps all of the people who died before their time. And then when their allotted time, when the years have actually come to where she would have supposed to have died, I give her over to the angel called Duma, who actually gives the final fate to the people who have died and places her in where she's supposed to go. In the meantime, she spends some time in my place. I keep them nice, I feed them well, whatever I do for them, I take care of them. They're dead now, but I don't send them over to Duma for their final sentence until their years are finally reached. So Amarlei, sof, shaneha my avdis. So, but still, says Rav Bibi, but all those years that she left the world prematurely, you've got to offset those years by giving them to someone else. What are you going to do with those extra years? She died at 50 or 40. She was supposed to die at 80 or 90. What about all those years? So Amar ikat surva merabanan demavr b'milei mosfina lahu lei v'hav yechilufe. So the Malach HaMavis says, this is very powerful. He says, if there's a Talmud Chacham who's mavir al midaisav, who's forgiving, when people show him dishonor, they say an unkind word or disrespectful, and he pretends that it does, he pretends that he didn't hear anything, and he says, forget about it, it's no problem. So Hashem takes those years that he took prematurely from someone who died before their time and adds them onto the years of the Talmud Chacham. That's the answer, that's the story. So therefore you see that there are certain situations where a person can die before their time. Let's hope the Malach HaMavis henchman is a smarter guy than the one that we found in this story when it's time for us to go. Have a wonderful Guten Erev Shabbos.